Valentine's Day, a day of love, devotion, and promises of forever. But for Richard Schoeck, it became the day of his execution. He thought he was meeting his wife for a romantic exchange at a secluded park, a quiet moment to celebrate their love. But instead, he was met with gunfire, 6 bullets at close range. No witnesses, no signs of a struggle. Just a man left to die in the cold, his truck still running, his killer vanishing into the night. His wife, Stacey Schoeck, sobbed to police, claiming she had arrived just moments too late. But as investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a truth more chilling than anyone could have imagined. Because this wasn't a crime of passion, this wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was a carefully planned hit, ordered by the woman who was supposed to love him the most. How did a Valentine's Day tradition turn into a cold-blooded murder? And how did a wife orchestrate the death of her own husband, believing she could walk away with $500,000 and a new life? The call came in just after 9 p.m. A frantic voice on the line, struggling to hold back tears, telling dispatchers that she had arrived at Belton Bridge Park and found her husband dead. Stacey Schoeck sounded devastated. She told officers she was supposed to meet Richard there, a quiet Valentine's Day tradition they had shared before. But instead of exchanging gifts, she had stumbled upon a nightmare. When officers arrived at the scene, the park was eerily quiet. The only movement came from Richard Schoeck's truck, still running, headlights cutting through the darkness. The driver's side door was open, and just a few feet away, Richard lay lifeless on the gravel, his body riddled with gunshot wounds. 6 shots fired at close range, not one sign of a struggle, nothing stolen. This wasn't a robbery, and it wasn't random. This was an execution. As crime scene technicians moved in, the details of the murder painted a disturbing picture. Richard had been shot in a way that ensured he wouldn't survive. His wounds were precise. Whoever pulled the trigger had experience. Detectives scanned the scene for shell casings, footprints, any sign of who had been there. But the killer had left nothing behind. No fingerprints, no DNA, no trail to follow. The only person at the scene was Stacey, sobbing as she repeated the same words to officers. She had just arrived, just minutes too late. If she had only been faster, she said, maybe she could have saved him. Something felt off. As detectives spoke with her, they couldn't help but notice how rehearsed her answers seemed. Her emotions were there, but there was something about them that didn't feel natural. She was crying, but there were no real tears. Grieving, but not asking any questions about who had done this. Something about her story didn't sit right. As the night stretched on and the crime scene was processed, investigators kept circling back to one question. Why had Richard Schoeck, a man with no known enemies, been murdered in such a cold and calculated way? And why had his wife chosen a remote park late at night for a Valentine's Day meeting? From the moment detectives started digging into Richard Schoeck's murder, something about his wife's story didn't feel right. Stacey Schoeck insisted that she had arrived just moments after the shooting, claiming she had been running late. But as investigators pressed her for details, her story remained oddly vague. She couldn't explain why she had chosen such an isolated park for their Valentine's Day exchange. She claimed it was sentimental, but police found it strange that a woman who described herself as safety-conscious would pick such a dark, secluded area at night. And then there was her demeanor. She wasn't asking the questions they expected from a grieving wife. Who could have done this? Why would someone want her husband dead? Instead, Stacey seemed to be sticking to a script, making sure detectives knew she had arrived too late to see the killer. The first red flag came when investigators looked into Richard's life. He had no criminal history, no involvement in anything shady, no angry business partners or bitter feuds. By all accounts, he was a well-liked, devoted husband and stepfather who spent his time working and taking care of his family. There was no reason for anyone to hunt him down and execute him in a park. Then detectives started looking into Stacey. They found something that changed the direction of the entire investigation. She had recently taken out a $500,000 life insurance policy on Richard, and she had signed the paperwork just weeks before his murder. Detectives knew that when a husband is murdered, the spouse is often the first person to be investigated. Stacey Schoeck had played the role of the grieving widow well, but something wasn't adding up. Her story felt too rehearsed, her emotions too controlled. And now, with the discovery that she had taken out a $500,000 life insurance policy on Richard just weeks before his death, her name moved from concerned wife to prime suspect. Investigators dug deeper into Stacey's finances and uncovered something even more alarming. She was drowning in debt. As they pieced together her financial records, they saw a woman who had maxed out credit cards, unpaid loans, and a lifestyle she could no longer afford. Richard's murder had suddenly turned into something more than a random shooting. It looked like a motive. But if Stacey had planned this, she hadn't done it alone. The execution-style killing of Richard had been too precise, too professional. The scene had been wiped clean. No evidence had been left behind. This wasn't something a grieving wife could have pulled off herself. Then detectives made a breakthrough. Phone records showed a series of calls between Stacey and a man named Reginald Coleman. He wasn't a relative, he wasn't a business associate. He was a personal trainer with a military background, a man known for his discipline, precision, and dangerous connections. His nickname? Mr. Results. The name Reginald Coleman meant nothing to investigators at first, but once they started digging, they realized they had just uncovered the missing link in the case. Coleman was a former Marine, a fitness trainer, and a man with a reputation for getting things done, no matter what. That reputation had earned him a nickname among his clients and acquaintances, Mr. Results. He wasn't just someone who helped people get in shape. He was someone who knew how to handle a job professionally, efficiently, and without leaving a trace. Detectives discovered that Stacey Schoeck had been in frequent contact with Coleman in the weeks leading up to Richard's murder. At first, the calls were short, simple exchanges, but in the days just before the killing, their communication intensified. There were dozens of calls, some lasting only a few seconds, just enough time to relay a message without saying too much. Then there was the money. Bank records showed that large cash withdrawals had been made from Stacey's account in the weeks before Richard's death. Thousands of dollars, unaccounted for. Stacey had claimed she was struggling financially, yet here she was pulling out large sums of money in secret. Detectives now had a strong theory. Stacey had wanted her husband dead, and she had hired Coleman to make it happen. But had he worked alone? As they dug deeper, they uncovered one more accomplice, a woman named Linan Fagan, a friend of Coleman's who had helped coordinate the hit. The final piece of the puzzle was coming together. Now, detectives just needed proof. With evidence piling up, detectives knew it was time to make their move. They had the money trail. They had phone records connecting Stacey Schoeck to Reginald Coleman. And now, they had another name. Linan Fagan, the woman who had helped set up the hit. But before making arrests, investigators needed to hear the truth straight from Stacey. If she really was behind Richard's murder, they wanted to see if she would slip up under pressure. When detectives brought Stacey in for questioning, she played the part of the devastated widow. At first, she stuck to her story, repeating over and over again that she had just arrived, moments too late to save her husband. She denied knowing anything about who would want to harm Richard, shaking her head, sighing, forcing out tears that never really seemed to come. But detectives weren't buying it. Then they hit her with what they had been holding back, the evidence. They laid out the phone records, showing her constant communication with Coleman before and after the murder. They revealed the financial transactions, pointing to the large cash withdrawals just weeks before Richard was killed. And then, the final blow. They told her that they had already spoken to Linnane Fagan. It was a bluff. They hadn't confronted Fagan yet, but Stacey didn't know that. For the first time, Stacey's face changed. The confidence wavered. Her carefully rehearsed grief started crumbling. She slumped back in her chair, took a deep breath, and in a quiet voice she confessed. Yes, she had arranged Richard's murder. Yes, she had hired Coleman to kill him. Yes, Linnane Fagan had helped. But in the end, her excuse was as pathetic as it was horrifying. She was unhappy in her marriage and needed a way out. She hadn't just wanted Richard dead. She had wanted to move on, cash in on the $500,000 life insurance policy, and start a new life without the hassle of divorce. But now, instead of a fresh start, Stacey Schoeck was facing a lifetime behind bars. Once Stacey Schoeck confessed, investigators wasted no time bringing in the rest of the players in her deadly scheme. First, they went after Reginald Coleman, the hitman known as Mr. Results. When officers arrived to arrest him, he didn't fight. He knew the game was over. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Phone records, bank withdrawals, and now Stacey's confession. Then came Linnane Fagan. She had been Coleman's connection to Stacey, the one who helped arrange the murder and made sure everything went according to plan. When detectives confronted her, she broke quickly. In an attempt to save herself, she agreed to cooperate, revealing even more details about how the murder was set up. According to Fagan, Stacey had been planning this for weeks. She didn't just want Richard dead, she wanted to make sure there were no mistakes. She had been willing to pay whatever it took to have her husband executed on Valentine's Day, knowing that she could stand over his body, pretending to be a grieving widow while cashing in on his life insurance. But what she hadn't planned for was getting caught. With confessions and solid evidence, prosecutors had everything they needed to take all three to trial. With Stacey Schoeck's confession and overwhelming evidence tying Reginald Coleman and Linnane Fagan to the murder, prosecutors had a solid case. But Stacey didn't wait for a trial. She pleaded guilty to murder, admitting that she had orchestrated her husband's execution in cold blood. In exchange for avoiding the death penalty, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Reginald Coleman, the hitman who pulled the trigger, also pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life without parole. Linnane Fagan, who had helped connect Stacey and Coleman, received 30 years in prison for her role in planning the murder. For Richard's family, justice was served, but the betrayal was something they would never forget. Richard Schoeck had no idea that the woman he loved, the woman he trusted, had spent weeks plotting his murder. He thought he was meeting Stacey for a romantic exchange on Valentine's Day. Instead, he was walking into a trap. She had made vows to love and cherish him. Instead, she handed his life over to a hitman for money. In the end, Stacey Schoeck got exactly what she wanted: freedom from her marriage. But instead of starting over with $500,000, she'll spend the rest of her life behind bars. She thought she had planned the perfect crime, but in the end, she couldn't escape the truth.